Good morning. Today's scripture reading is from the book of Genesis, chapter 6, starting from verse 9. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you, 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as the Lord commanded him. The word of the Lord.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hey, the sun's out. It's summer, and I am so glad to be here with you. Excuse me as I move my furniture. We are beginning a new series today called Still Standing. And if you're old like me, when you hear this, you think of the 1983 Elton John hit by the same name. And some of you are like, man, you're old. And some of you are now humming that in your heads as we go through today. But we're starting a new series because there's this characteristic that all of us could develop, and we could develop more of in our lives. And it's a single word that's going to anchor us through the entire rest of the summer as we journey through what this means for us. And it's the word endurance. Endurance. The world around us increasingly does not have this. You know, we find people who, when the going gets tough in various areas of their lives, as the saying goes, the tough gets going. And really, what is endurance? It's simply this. It's faithfulness. We've talked a lot about faithfulness the past few weeks, but it's faithfulness over the passage of time. It's faithfulness over the passage of time. And suddenly, some of you can find yourselves, and I'm ringing a little bit, so just pull the volume down a little bit on that if you don't mind. You can find yourselves in this because you're in a circumstance where you have to endure. Maybe you've just come out of a season where you've been enduring and you've been trying to keep it together, you've been trying to do the right things, but it just feels like this slow burn that's in your life. It feels like things are slowly being eaten away and you're just trying to keep enough of it together for the long time. You know, one of the things I do in my backyard, we had our patio redone a few years ago, and every house I've been in, I end up with a fire pit because I'm a fire pit kind of guy, especially in the spring and in the fall. The summer right now, it's just too hot for it a lot of times. But over the years, I've become, in true suburban dad fashion, really good at building fires out of whatever I have in hand. And if you've ever built a fire, you know that one of the really key things for a successful fire, you know, is the right kind of wood stack, the right kind of way with the right balance of air and fuel. But the other thing is that your wood is not wet. That you put dry things in there and you start with kindling, you start with something to start it with. But if you don't have that, you have a slow burn. You have something that doesn't catch fire, and it just kind of goes along, and it might even go out, and there's a lot of smoke, and there's just difficulty in getting it going. And that's what this feels like for us. Some of you can relate to this in your hearts or in your families or in your finances or in your job or in your physical health or in so many other ways that this is just how it's felt. Maybe this is how it feels going forward. And so endurance is this characteristic that we all want. We all want to endure in good times and in bad. We want to endure when the sun is shining like today and when the rain is falling like it did earlier this week. We want this, but this is a hard thing for us, and it's an especially hard thing for the world around us to keep in perspective and to hold on to. And so here's what this is. Endurance it's following God regardless of if we see the benefit right away. And that sounds like the pastor church thing to say. We ought to follow God, we ought to honor him, we ought to keep his commands. But it's also following God in how he has shown us how to live our lives. It's following God when he has said, here is how you, as the people of God, are supposed to live. Here's how you can live as a result of who I have made you to be. In the New Testament book of Hebrews, there's this one verse in chapter 12 and verse 2. It says this: fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author or the pioneer, the one who came first, the one who showed us how to do it, and the perfecter of our faith, the one who made all things perfect and gives us the ability to walk in his way. For the joy set before him, here's the word, he did what? He endured the cross. He endured something that literally brought him to the point of death. But because he endured, we know the story. He rose again on the third day, and that's what it talks about, scorning his shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So that's what Jesus did. But then there's this thing that we can do as we live in the world. There's a famous passage of scripture in the book of 1 Corinthians in chapter 13. If you've been to nearly any Christian wedding, you've heard this. And one of the verses in it says this. It says, love never gives up. It never loses faith. It's always hopeful. It's always hanging on to hope. And it endures through every circumstance. So over the next weeks, we're going to journey through the scriptures and see how endurance played out in the lives of the people found there and how it can play out in our life as well. We heard the story of Noah today. Some of you, when Josh started reading, you're like, yes, I know this one. I've heard this one in Sunday school. I know what happens. It's not this obscure story, but it's a story of endurance in obedience. But it's also, and this thing I want us to get with this story, it's a story of endurance when we feel alone. When we feel alone. Because when we're with people, when we know that we're not alone, it's so much easier to keep going. It doesn't mean that it's easy, but it's easier to keep going. But when we feel like we've been called to this thing, when we feel like there's this thing that we've got to keep doing, and we feel like we're alone in trying to do it, that's where it gets really difficult for us. That's where it feels like that slow burn that we talked about. And in the story of Noah, we find that endurance, it's obeying God, but it's doing it over a period of time, and it's doing it alone. I don't know if you can relate to this, but there's some seasons in my life where I felt completely alone, even when I'm doing the right thing. Sometimes we think, we're going to feel alone when we did the wrong thing. We're going to be isolated, and that may be true. But there's these times where even when you're doing the right thing, you feel alone, and you ask yourself these kind of questions. You're like, did I get this right? Did I hear this right? Did God speak to me? Did I just miss it? Did I just miss what I was supposed to do, and I was deceived, or I was off course, or I didn't listen well? And you just start to ask yourself all these questions. I've had so many of those seasons in my life because in those moments the silence feels loud, the work feels heavy, and giving up seems easier than keeping going. So many of us have we found ourselves in those places where we're doing the right thing and it feels like we're alone. I think we think in our minds like, okay, if I do the right thing, it's all going to fall into place and it's going to make sense, and I'm going to see how it works out, and I'm going to see how God provides. I'm going to see what God does. And sometimes it just feels like God is silent, or even sometimes that he's absent, because sometimes obedience, it doesn't make you feel closer to others. It makes you feel even more isolated. We all want to be the ones. I want to be the one where I'm like, I can make the tough call. I can obey. I can endure. I can be faithful. All of us want that. But the part that we often don't consider, we don't wrestle with, is the cost of sitting alone in the fallout. Sitting alone when we've tried to follow, and sometimes feeling alone in the process. Now here's the good news, though, is we're never actually alone. The Lord has promised us, and we cling to this promise that he will never leave us or forsake us. But sometimes still the feelings, even if the reality is actually different, the feelings are the same. And then the story of Noah that we've just heard, this is where he lived. We read the story, it's like, okay, God told Noah to build an ark, and then he built an ark, and he got a whole ton of animals, and he threw them in the ark, and he got his family, and then there was a flood, and then the flood receded, and then there was this olive branch, and he got on dry ground, and then the credits roll, and what a great story. Well, what happens is God calls Noah to this thing, and kind of buried in the text a little bit, it's up in a couple verses before where we picked up today in verse 3 of chapter 6. There's this place where God says, I've kind of had it with the people of the earth because they're violent, they're not honoring me, and they're actually just being completely destructive. So I'm going to kind of give them what they have, they're going to reap what they've sowed. And he says this thing about 120 years being the span. And what scholars interpret that to be is the amount of time between when God told Noah to build the ark and when the flood actually came. At this point, the lifespan of people was longer than it is today. But just imagine for a second if God told you to build a giant boat in your backyard. I've got some neighbors, and they've put up with some crazy stuff. Right now, we have some rose bushes, and in my man versus nature lifestyle that some of you have heard about, I'm doing a battle with the deer. And I've got some fencing in the garage. I'm going to make these cages for the rose bushes, but I haven't done it yet. And so I have like a baseball net, my recycling containers, and 2 chairs from my patio, building this like barricade around the roses. And I'm sure when my neighbors go out to walk their dogs, they're just like, oh my gosh, who are these people that moved in next to us? But imagine if someone built this crazy monstrosity, or maybe you did it, and people were just like, what's going on? And a couple of them called the town because it probably went against some zoning ordinance. But it went on for years and years and years and years, and it was never finished. It just seemed like it was never finished. This is a long period of time. Because for us, like when God calls us to something, or we know, I need to be faithful in this difficult thing, or there's this thing that's happened in my life and it's hard, but I'm going to walk it out, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to stay faithful, and I'm going to obey, and I'm going to keep showing up and keep showing up. It's easy to do that for the first few days, or the first few weeks, or even the first few years. But as time goes on, you're like, what gives? God, I thought you told me to do this thing, and I'm not sure I understood it. Endurance, it doesn't mean ease. It does mean obedience. Listen to one of the other places. It's in the New Testament. It's in that same book of Hebrews that we read from earlier that talks about Noah. And it says this about him in verse 7 of chapter 11. It says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen. So God's saying there's this thing that's coming, and it's a long way in the future, but do the thing that I've called you to do. In holy fear, build an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So Noah acted by faith in holy fear. There is no record of support, of applause, of company, of songs, and the credits roll, and all the things that we would like to happen. There's just this long, slow, lonely obedience. But in the midst of that time, and this is a key for us, Noah wasn't just sitting around. Noah did something. Because obedience, endurance, it came with work. And that work was the thing that sustained him. God didn't just give Noah words, he gave him work. And I think sometimes we miss this. We're like, okay, God has said a thing, so I'm just going to wait for God to do the thing. And he said, there's actually something for you to do as well. Every time God works in the world, in our lives, it is his power meeting our faithfulness, and that faithfulness is measured by the steps that we take one after the other. So endurance, it starts in our hearts, but it always moves to our hands. Endurance starts in our hearts and it moves to our hands. So it starts with this thing that he's called us to, but it always results in action at some point. Now, this crazy thing that he was building in the backyard, this ark, you know, in the scriptures, it has this measurement called a cubit, and some of you are like, I have no idea what that is. Here's your lesson. If you remember nothing else today, it's about the distance from here to here. From your elbow to your forearm. It's about 18 inches. So if we do the math, the ark is about 450 feet long, it's 75 feet wide, and it's about 45 feet high. This isn't a rowboat. This is an overwhelming project built in the face of questions, of ridicule from the surrounding watching world over a long period of time. It's a long period of time. You know, the world is full of unfinished projects. It's full of things that got started, and they got started with these great glamorous intentions, and they never got finished. You know, as a kid, my extended family lives in Ohio, and in the place where they live outside on the outskirts of Columbus, there was this exit we would always get off of, and there was an office building that had been built there, and they started and they didn't finish it for years. It just sat there as like the shell of bricks with no windows and no one occupying. And eventually they did finish it, but I always just remember as a kid going by there and just recognizing this unfinished project that had happened. You know, my dad, he had this 1970 Toyota Land Cruiser that sat in our garage for years. Some of y'all, you have a project car. A couple of you have a project car, and it's the car that you are allegedly going to finish, like restoring or reworking or something like that at some point, or maybe it's a boat, or many of you have something like this in your life. And it just sat there, and we as kids, we'd go play in it, but it never went anywhere. It just didn't go anywhere, and here's why. Because the hardest part of any project is the middle of it. The hardest part of anything you set out to do is the middle of it. It's not the beginning, because in the beginning you have this motivation, you have this vision, you have this energy, you know how, you're like, this is going to happen, and here's how it's going to happen. And when you get towards the end of the project, when you can see the finish line, you're like, I can see the finish line, I have the strength to keep going. So beginning's relatively easy. The end, we have the motivation to keep going, but it's the middle where we struggle. It's when we can't see the beginning anymore. And we cannot yet see the end. So we're in this place where the thing that God has started isn't there anymore. And the thing that's going to pull us to the finish isn't there anymore. And some of you are walking in something like that right now, where you got up and said, this thing has to be done. I've got to do it. Maybe if it's even a good thing, you're like, I have this vision that God has given me. I have this call to faithfulness that I know I need to make to my kids, even though I'm a single parent. Or my family, when things are difficult, or, you know, to this person who is struggling physically, or to this thing that God has called me to do. And you got going, but then the beginning faded out of view, and you found yourself in the middle, wondering if there was ever going to be an end. But here's the thing that Noah did, that I'm encouraging you. I just want to encourage you today. Keep doing the work that God has put in your hands. Keep doing that work. Just keep putting one foot in front of the next foot. Get up the next morning and trust that even though you can't see over here yet, that God will give you enough strength for today. He has promised to do that for you. Now, one of the best things that you can do when you're in this spot. And this doesn't sound right when I say it. Allow me to explain myself. One of the best things you can do when you find yourself there is to keep going through the motions. There's this phrase in our society, fake it until you make it. Fake it until you make it. That doesn't sound like what you should hear in church, but one of the things I've learned in my own life is that sometimes you start by doing, and then eventually you begin to feel. So a lot of times we're like, I want to feel the thing and then I'm going to do the thing. Sometimes it's just taking that step. It's willing ourselves up. It's praying to God for the strength to do it and then taking the step. And we still don't feel anything in the midst of it. And so endurance, it starts also in our hands and then it moves to our heart. So it starts when we start doing, and over time it begins to migrate to our heart. I've told this story before. When I came back to Long Hill Chapel, it's been more than 6 years ago I came back to Long Hill. I can't believe it. A couple of you are like, really? Can you move it along? But I'm so thankful to be here, and I want you to always hear that. This is our home as a family. It was just, my boys were in the front row, and man, I love being here, and we are just so grateful to be part of this family, this community here at Long Hill. And I wasn't doing that, so you're like, yeah, you're great. But when I came back here, I was not into this. I promise you. I'd just been in a season where I'd been in this church ministry where we had begun a new church, and it was quite the time, and there were some real highs and some real lows. And I felt God was moving me into a new season of transition, and that church, thankfully, is thriving. It's a wonderful place. And I was in this middle period where I was like, God, what do I do next? What do you have for me next? I hope it's awesome. And then God, by a bunch of circumstances, ended me up back here. And I remember, no offense, people, I was like, why am I here? I was like the interim worship leader. That's something I hadn't really done in a while. And I just, I felt like God had said to me, like, you can help out in this way. You can be helpful and useful and serve this church in this way. And then the pandemic happened. And then there was a transition in our senior leadership, and I was kind of like, and I think some of the leaders were like that too, and it's like, this church needs someone to get it through this difficult time. And so I said, God, okay, I'll be that person, but after it's done, I'm done. And then something began to happen. It was about in the early part of 2022. I've always loved you, but there was this moment where God got my heart for you and for this place and for the future of this place. And hear me out. I don't want to serve here any longer than the last day that God would have me here. But I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to be here a very long time with you, as long as God would have me here. And I love being here. I love what God is doing. I love the highs, but I love the difficult times too, because it's something God has called us to do together. But I tell you that long story just to illustrate the fact that sometimes endurance just starts with obedience. It starts with us doing the thing, and we're like, I don't want to do the thing, but I know for some reason, whether it's God or some other thing, that this is the thing I've got to do, and over time it moves to our heart. It doesn't start there. We live in this world that says, follow your heart. That's probably on a bumper sticker somewhere. And there's this idea that when you feel something, you should follow it. And I want to just tell you what the scriptures say about that. There's this very motivational, inspirational verse in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 17 and verse 9. It says this: the human heart is deceitful above all things and without cure. Who can understand it? That's not on a bumper sticker anywhere. But it's this idea that our hearts sometimes sell us things that are leading us in the wrong direction, not the right direction. People come into my office all the time who have followed their hearts instead of listening to God and reading His Word and receiving the counsel of other wise people who love them enough to tell them the truth. And they follow their hearts instead, and they end up in a world of hurt because our hearts don't always lead us in the right direction. Sometimes they don't lead us in any good direction at all. And that's why this endurance characteristic of starting, even when we don't feel it. If you don't feel anything, or if you don't even feel the right things, if you're like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, you can still do the right thing. So endurance, sometimes it starts in our heart. It always moves to our hands, but occasionally it starts in our hands, and over time, it actually moves to our heart. And so endurance, it keeps your hands full and it keeps your heart anchored. Keeps your hands full, it keeps your heart anchored. And so when you're feeling alone, pray for strength for the next day. Pray for strength, just enough for the next step. Trust that even when you're in the middle and you don't see the end yet, that God is with you with just enough for you to continue to walk faithfully. You're enduring. God's with you. He sees it. He sees you. He knows the struggle. And He's with you anyway. There's one other aspect of this that we see in the story of Noah as we begin to kind of come to the conclusion. And thank you for enduring, by the way, through all of this. And this is, I think, a little complicated for us to understand. What if the thing that God is using, the work that He's put in your hands now that keeps you going, that keeps you enduring, is actually the thing that will allow you to endure even more in the future? So there's this thing right here, and I think we all are like, I've got to get through it, I've got to get through it, but there will be a time when I'm through it. But God is actually building something in you that you will take with you into the future circumstances, into the future world, into the future life, into the future relationships, into the future job, into the future obstacles, into all the places that He will call you, and that'll call us so that we can shine a light in the world that looks different than all of the people around us. And it's actually this thing that's preparing us for that. Because I think we're always thinking about, I've just got to do the thing, and eventually God's going to show up, and it's going to be great. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes the relief comes. Sometimes you get to the end of the project. You see the end. But a lot of times, I would even say this, most of the time, the thing that God is using in you is building a character. It's building a strength that doesn't come in any other way, and it prepares you for the future. Think about the story of Noah. Noah builds this ark for 120 years. Finally, the ark is done. What happens next in the story? Like everyone holds a party and celebrates and said, "You finally finished building the boat. Let's celebrate." No, the flood comes. And I can only imagine that 120-year period of obedience, even when you didn't see it, even when you felt alone, was the thing that gave him the character for the next season, even when that next season was difficulty. And so endurance in the now, it's actually the thing that sets you up for faithfulness with the future. It's the thing that builds a character in you. The New Testament in Romans chapter 5 talks about this. It says, we can rejoice, and this sounds counterintuitive, in our sufferings because it's creating something in us. And at the end of that thing that it creates hope. Suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us, the scriptures say. So if you're looking for hope today, it's found at the end of endurance. Hope is found at the end of endurance. It's like, I hope it won't rain. I hope the Yankees will get back to be first in the division, right, Lou? That would be great. Last night was a good game for that. No one cares about this except a few of us. But we hope a lot of things, but hope is a character trait. That regardless of what happens in the world around us, we cling to a vision that God has given us. So there's no continuation unless Noah has done this for a long time. And I think a lot of us, we think, this stuff's just going to show up in our lives. It's just going to show up there. But there's a way that it gets there. There's a way that it's built. Enduring now allows you to endure even more in the future. It sets you up for faithfulness in the future. So as we close, I know for many of you, there's a picture that you found yourself in where you're having to endure. Where are you feeling alone right now? You said yes. You gave God your yes. You said, I know these things aren't the way I want them to be, but I have to continue to show up. And instead of it getting better, it just feels like it's the same, or sometimes it even feels like worse. And you're like, God, did I hear you right? Can I keep doing this? Can I keep going? What's the thing in the midst of that God has continued to ask you to put your hand to continue to build? What if the very thing that God is using to keep you standing, enduring, is the work that he's already put in your hands? What if the very thing that God is going to use to keep you standing, it's not something else? It's not even the end of this thing, it's the thing itself. It's the next step. It's the next day. It's the next moment of deciding to continue to trust when it would be so much easier to either give up or just become cynical in the middle of it. You're tired. You think this is pointless. But the work God has given you is to build endurance. So friends, I want to encourage you. I want to encourage us to keep showing up, to keep obeying, to keep enduring, because it matters. And the thing that God has called you to matters. And there's this prayer that I want to pray for you. It's from the scriptures. It's from the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, where Nehemiah is building this wall, and it seems like this project that's just ongoing, and it's never going to end, and there's threats from within and there's threats from without, and he seems like he's alone, and he prays this simple prayer, and this can be your prayer as well. In fact, I encourage it to be your prayer today and tomorrow and the next day. It's this: now strengthen my hands. Now strengthen my hands. God, you've called me to this thing. I am going to continue to be faithful to this thing, but I pray that you would strengthen my hands. This is your prayer today. This is my prayer for you today. What if we became this kind of people, still standing? Not because life is easy, but because God has given us a call and a work. And he's with you in the waiting, even sometimes when it feels like you're waiting alone. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you do give us the strength. Life never seems like it makes the sense that we would want it to make. But you walk with us. I pray for those who feel alone today, that they would just have a glimpse of your presence, a glimpse of the fact that you're with them, a reminder that you're still at work. That wherever they find themselves, as they continue to put their hands to the work, even sometimes as we feel like we're faking it until we make it, that we would continue as individuals, in the places, with the people, in the circumstances that we find ourselves in, to be faithful, to keep obeying even over time, even when the beginning has disappeared in the distance and the end hasn't shown up yet, to be the kind of people that would endure. We pray these things in Jesus' name.